Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Welcome to The Struggle Within, our weekly akhlaq-based show that is inspired from the hadith where the companions of the Prophet were returning back from battle, congratulating one another on having partaken in the Jihad. When the Prophet then said to them, prepare yourselves now for the greater Jihad. So when they asked him, what is this greater Jihad? He mentioned this is the struggle of the nafs. As we've mentioned in previous shows, we've began this series looking at definitions of what the greater jihad is and what this greater struggle is. We looked at various different concepts and key ideas. We're now looking at some of the vices as well as some of the prerequisites that are necessary when embarking on this. Today I'm delighted to be joined once again by Dr. Rebecca Marston. Assalamu alaikum. And we wish to discuss one of the fundamental prerequisites, and this is having a trust in God in everything that we do. And again, this is we have a tradition that was narrated from Al-Kulayni, and he narrates it from a chain of narrators all the way to Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he was asked about having trust in God, and the Imam said, there are various degrees one can have trust in God. And he said, of them, one is that you should put your trust in God in all your affairs, being very pleased with whatever God does to you, knowing for certain that He does not cease in His goodness and grace towards you, and that the command herein rests with Him, so everything is within His control. He says, so put your trust in God, leaving everything to Him and relying everything upon Him. And in everything, basically having all your trust in Him. I want to begin our discussion. If you can elaborate on the idea that he begins with, the idea that there are various levels of having trust in God. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, as he says, putting your trust in Allah and God in all of your affairs. I think this is a vast, this vast area. This is a vast, we could say, aspect of our spiritual cultivation. And I think, again, with the narrations, with the ahadith, and I think this is often with Islamic teachings in general, is that they sound a lot simpler than they actually are. They sound easier to put into practice than they actually are. And I think this is one of them as well, that, as he mentions as well, being pleased with whatever Allah puts in your path. This is not easy. It reminds me as well of another speech that he was given, khutbah he gave, which is mentioned in Nahj al-Balagha, when he says to the people listening to him, what is your condition? I see that you are upset if you lose the little that you've been given, and your displeasure and your discontent is shown on your faces. So having trust in Allah in all matters and in all circumstances, again, requires a deeper understanding of the lessons that Allah is putting in our way. And I think, everyone goes through life challenges. Often we are given the idea that the path towards Allah entails going closer and closer towards the light, we could say, or increasing the nur within our heart, and then it's kind of like this straight itinerary that's progressing towards Allah. But I think also there's a kind of interesting discovery that I've made in life, observing life, is that Allah can also be found in what you might call the shadows. Allah can be found in the difficulties that He puts a human being. And this is where you can, in a sense, gain that sense of pleasure with what Allah has given you. Because it's natural for the human being to say, I'm not feeling happy right now, how can I feel happy? This has been done to me, or that's been done to me, or I'm struggling with this, or that's blocking my way. How can I be happy with the, you know, how can I be happy with the situation that He's put me in? But at the same time, this is the nature of this world. How can you escape from that? So there must be something in it. There must be something that we need to learn and we need to master.
Definitely. I mean, you touched on various different elements, and again, the different levels. I mean, there's one, you could say one level of accepting the idea that you have, you know, that you haven't got the control.
Yeah.
So you accept that, and then you naturally have to then put your trust in Him once you've accepted that. But like you said, it's the idea of being pleased,
Yeah.
you know, and, you know, I suppose the telling example that comes to mind was when Lady Zainab was asked, I mean, what is your opinion of, you know, what has happened on the day of Karbala, and how you know, Yazid coined it in a way that, or I think it was Ibn Ziyad, one of the two, coined it in the idea that God has done this to you. And she said, I saw nothing but beauty. And I don't think, you know, that she wasn't just trying to be defiant in her speech.
No.
You know, there was a genuine level of acceptance and pleasure that, you know, we've been accepted for this, to be this sign for the people, etc. But what I want to touch on, again, bringing the discussion back, is, you know, how different is the theoretical understanding of this, the idea that we are created, you know, God is in control, you know, it's easy, right? But practically speaking, the idea that we have that trust in God, you know, when in actual fact, or maybe, or, you know, the idea that, for example, I'm at work, I work for this individual, he is my employer, he's my, you know, my manager or my boss, and, you know, you feel that your sustenance or your rizq or your attention needs to be on pleasing this individual, and you have your trust in this individual, or, for example, gaining a contract from a certain customer or something like along those lines, as opposed to the idea of putting that trust into God. So when you ask that individual, who'd be like, of course, trust in God, He created me. But then in, you know, actual practicality, it's, you know, it's really difficult. So I think ultimately it's accepting that difficulty maybe is maybe one step towards that, gaining that trust or having that trust in God.
I think also perhaps recognizing that whatever is given to us is from Allah as a part of our destiny, and making the decision that whatever happens, my connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to be lost or shaken, in a sense, so that, you know, you can kind of test yourself and think, supposing everything that I've built for the last 20, 30 years all collapses tomorrow, what am I going to do? And this actually does happen to people in their lives. You know, businesses collapse, as we've seen in the Middle East. Houses collapse, you know. People don't get compensation for their houses being bombed out. And yet, you often see that their tawakkul hasn't been shaken. So, I think also, when we're living in a very materialistic world, our minds are also trained to seek our sustenance, from other human beings, and you know, to work towards that. And hence we have a very aggressive, competitive society often, where people are prepared to, again, violate ethics, step on other human beings, and justify that to themselves, because they say, well, if I don't do this, I'm going to lose out. So the thinking behind putting your trust in other human beings, or putting your trust in the economic system as an example, I need to get promoted at the bank because if I don't, then this, that and that, and so this is what I'm going to work towards, and I have to kind of please my boss, and if that means that I have to spend time away from my family because of working long hours, I will do that because this is going to get me the promotion. So it's all, in a sense, putting yourself at the centre of whatever is coming to you, or bringing everything down onto a human level. So it all comes down to, I can't do this because otherwise I'll mess up and then I'll lose out on that. Or if you're putting your trust in another human being, then, and we see this as well, supposing that boss says, sorry, we have to downsize, we're shrinking the company, you're going to be one of the people to go. And then your life is turned upside down. You said, but I put in extra hours, I did this, I did that, I ticked all the boxes, I did the right thing, and you're left unemployed, then you are going to be burning with anger and resentment at the system, burning with anger and resentment at your boss, sink into a depression. I mean, we often see that with people who've got these challenging situations, becoming an embittered person, and because of being embittered, actually keeping further opportunities at bay, because no one wants to employ a bitter person. That's just sort of one example. Whereas I think if we're putting our trust in Allah, it gives you this supreme independence from humanity. And I can say this from my own experience, where I was briefly given a job, and the people in that office didn't like the fact that I was a European convert to Islam, so they kind of dropped me from that job. And I thought to myself, rather than hate them for what they've done, or retaliate in some way, I'll just leave it. Tawakkul ala Allah. My rizq is from Allah, it's not from you. And I just moved on, got on with my life. And 6 months later, they wrote and said, actually, we need you for something. Could you do? And alhamdulillah, I was too busy to. I didn't need them. I didn't need to go back. So it gives you your dignity as well. If you're not depending on other human beings for your rizq, it gives you your dignity.
In that sense, I mean, obviously we're going to look at tests and trials and how, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may put these for us so that we can learn and understand who's actually in control and how we actually, how we cope in that sense. But just looking at this idea of trust in God, you know, it is a station that we may reach after having embarked on this greater jihad, but it's not something that happens overnight. You can't just turn that trust on. And I think we shouldn't lose heart on the basis if we do feel that we lack it, because it's not something that you can just turn on or switch on. It's something that is gradual. It's something that takes time. It takes experience. It takes situations that God puts you in where you feel completely out of control, and He shows you how you aren't in control in that sense, and then He brings you out of it in that sense, and you feel it. You feel that hand of God. Excuse the term. And then you can say, wow, you know, like He's there, He's with me. I came through, not of my own actions in that sense. And then you can build on that trust of God in that sense. So just the idea that, you know, it's not something that just happens overnight or just happens instantaneously. It's something that we have to go through. If you could just elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think it's something that has to be reflected upon deeply and again cultivated, because also you may be, if you want to make that intention to be close to Allah, or you think you have reliance on Allah, the very thing that means something to you, or the very thing that you trust that Allah will sort out for you, He may take away from you. So I think this is one of the tests of the human being, that you can start out on a project, or you can start out on a road in life, and you can say, nah, this is right, I know, and I'm going to work towards this, and Allah will help me. So you put your 100% trust in Allah. This is where the test comes, because you think you've got tawakkul ala Allah, so I've got trust in Allah, this is going to work out, and people are going, are you sure that's right? And you say, no, I know, just, and then it all crashes and goes wrong, and He took it away from you, or it didn't work out, or it kind of went in a completely different direction from what you were expecting. And this is when people are tested, this is when it gets people. Because sometimes it's not that you didn't start out with tawakkul, you started out with tawakkul, and then your plan didn't go according to how you thought it should go, or how He should sort it out for you. And He's saying, no, it's going to go this way. So, and then you say, but you were supposed to do it like this, He hasn't done it the way I wanted. So how can I trust Him? And this is when the downward spiral starts, and it's, how can I trust myself? I trusted Allah, and so how can I, did I do the right thing? So that is the very test. And of course, I call these, these dark moments in our lives when things fall apart, to quote the famous writer Chinua Achebe. Things fall apart, and building the tawakkul from that point, where everything's been broken apart or gone wrong, that's the real testing point. So it's like, can you get back to that point where you have tawakkul after your house has been blown up, your business has collapsed, your kids don't come and visit you, etc. That's when the learning really begins, I think.
So can you elaborate more on just the idea that we're being tested here? What is the wisdom behind the trials that we go through, in terms of, making us, developing us in that sense? Because, to take an example from your own example, you mentioned, for example, you had that, you were in that job, and when you lost the job, you then said to yourself that, okay, this is an opportunity now for me to, for example, develop this trust in God. And you saw that 6 months later that, wow, He's got that safety net. So you've got that trust, you've built it. But whatever you've built, that trust that you've built will now then ultimately be tested. So you've got the initial test. Yeah. And then you may come through that very well, and He's shown you recognize, that looking at what I went through, I've got that trust in Him. So you've developed it, and now what you have developed will then be tested further.
Right. So progressive tests.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are progressive tests, but also I think they can come in areas that you don't expect as well. So it may be, well, you passed that one. But now try this one, from the side, that you weren't expecting. And so I think it can be progressive. And it requires a lot of thinking. I think when things kind of don't work out how you expect or how you think they should, it's a good idea to kind of take a retreat and do a lot of kind of contemplating, not only on, well, why didn't you do it the way I wanted, but also, is there some faulty thinking going on my side? And again, it's not like Imam Ali alayhi salam has said, there are those believers who their faith is like trade with Allah. So it's like, I do this for you, you do that for me. So that's not how it works. And I remember, years ago where there was a student who didn't get the grades that her mother wanted in her exams, and her mother said, right, I'm going to stop praying to Allah. And it's like, how can you stop praying to Allah just because your daughter didn't get the grades, you know, in her exam that you wanted? I hold majlis, I do this, I do that, and my daughter hasn't got the... It's like, yeah, so that's not how it works, though. Is that why you're holding majlis? And that expectation? I hold majlis, therefore you've got to do... So you can't dictate to Allah that what He should do for you. And I suppose that's a sign that He's the one in control. In fact, how I had observed this scenario was that the mother was had so many issues that were taking up the girl's time that the girl couldn't revise properly for her exams, and that's what brought about the bad grades. So it was actually coming from the family, but the mother blamed it on Allah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the test also is what are my faults in here that I want things to go a certain way and it hasn't gone that way, even though I put trust in Allah. What is it about you that made things go wrong, perhaps?
I think that this reminds me of part of that hadith where Imam says that, you know, you should know for certain that He does not cease in His goodness and grace towards you. So even when something doesn't go the way you wanted it to go, it's not just a matter of, okay, I want to try you, I want to try your faith. It's that it's gone this way because this is actually better for you. So it's not just, okay, you're testing how my trust or my faith. It's whatever the outcome is. I mean, we'll talk about this later on. This is an even higher station.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that, you know, to be certain that how it does happen is actually what was best for you.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, obviously that is also something that is really difficult to grasp, and we'll touch on that. But before we do, one thing that I want to look at is when you discuss, you know, having trust in God and these kind of subjects, and, you know, looking at the actual or trying to recognize His role and His power in everything that we do. You often get into the discussion, and this is obviously, you know, it's throughout history as well, is the idea of free will and predestination, right? You know, so some people, some individuals have taken to the point that everything is predestined.
Yeah.
So why should I have that concern, or, you know, I have full faith because whatever happens was meant to happen, and they accept it. And some individuals then question, what level of free will do we have?
Yeah.
Because if He's the one in control and I'm not, and I've accepted that, then, you know, where does the free will come into this? So if you could just touch on that.
I remember coming across an interesting narration. I mean, again, in Al-Kafi, there are a lot of these discussions. Volume 1, there's quite a lot of discussions on free will and predestination. And there's a narration from Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam where he says that the amount of leeway with regard to free will that is allotted to the human being is as wide as the space between the earth and the sky. So, although we talk about Amr bayn al-Amrayn, you know, the matter between two matters, the midway between predestination and free will, that free will that we have been given still has a huge amount of leeway, or we could say it has a huge amount of possibilities, huge number of possibilities that can be taken. And I think you can boil that down even to very small thoughts that you have, you know, how much pepper should I put on my dinner, and everything kind of adds up to a whole. So, you know, oh, I'll go down this road instead of that road, and then that leads to... So actually, every single decision that we make and every small thought that we have contributes to the unfolding of our destiny. checking that the door was locked at the last minute, or forgetting to switch the light off. All these things add up to how our destiny's going to flow. I mean, also, Imam Ali alayhi salam said, don't try and untangle or unpack this subject of predestination and free will, because he said it's very, very deep, it's very complex, and you can't solve it, because I think there's no kind of standard pattern in the way that Allah will intervene in our lives or not. So we can't really sit there kind of working out, oh, he intervened here. Sometimes it's obvious where he's intervened. But it's very difficult to work out, was this due to me, or is this part of what's meant to happen? I mean, also Holy Quran says, whatever good befalls you or bad befalls you has been written before it came into being, so that, and this is the famous chapter in relation to Zuhud that Imam Ali alayhi salam mentioned, so that you don't cry over what has been lost to you or exult in what has been given to you. So that there is this element that of predestination that cultivates acceptance in our actions. But yeah, the mystery of how much of our action has influenced how events have turned out, we can't really unpack. I've done that myself. I've tried to think very deeply over some things. I'm thinking, well, was that meant to be? I mean, is this the decree, or was it my fault? And I think the answer to that is that you go as far as you can with regard to taking responsibility, or observing your responsibility in something, or trying to correct your faults, and the rest has to come from Allah, really.
I think, yeah, definitely there are various ways of looking at them, and like none of them, I think, completely conclude the matter, if you like, or are able to provide a completely fitting description. I remember once hearing the idea that, try and look at your own life and see what has been predestined and what you have free will over. So, for example, the family that you were born into, your gender, what you look like, all these various different things that you can't change. These things were predestined.
Yeah.
But it's now up to you how you deal with these circumstances. So, for example, my free will is based on the intellect that I was given, for example. It's now up to me to make use of that, to not make use of it, or to exert myself, or to procrastinate, ultimately. So that's one way of looking at it. Another individual, they mentioned the idea of if you can kind of visualize a kind of tree diagram. So, you have, for example, two decisions or various decisions, and if you choose to go for door number one, you then have the opportunities that open up from that door. But the other opportunities, they're not there anymore. So, for example, this is maybe another way of understanding it. If you have the option of marrying two different people, so you choose one individual, so you've made that choice, but then that opens up various different opportunities that have, you could say, been destined, whereas those ones haven't. So, for example, if you have children, you could argue that those children were predestined to come through that, but you made that choice. But then you can argue, it can go both ways.
It's very complex, because I've had a couple of experiences in life where I made a decision, and I completely took it for granted it was my decision. But then things kind of happened for me to realise that my thoughts were not my own thoughts. Wow. So, as an example, I've got a bit of a longer story which I've told in the past. It's a bit too long to tell here, so I'll tell the shorter story, which is that when I was out in Karbala with the team from the channel, one of our team's mother used to, because she was out on ziyarah as well, she used to kind of take care of us and bring us coffee and things like that. And she had done that the previous year, and she did this the next year as well. So the next year I thought, we really need to do something to show some thanks, you know. And I went out into the city and I just thought, what can I get her just as a little thank you gift? And so I selected a tesbih. It was with pink glass beads. So I bought that, and I didn't see her for the rest of the journey because she was busy at Majalis, and so I didn't see her. So I didn't have the opportunity to give this tesbih to her. As it happened, she came over to London, and the family had a majlis, and I was invited to that majlis, and I knew she was going to be there. So I thought, now's the opportunity to give her this tesbih. So I went there, tesbih's in a little bag, and I gave it to her. And she said that when she had been in Karbala, she had gone up to a stall wanting a tesbih. The tesbih that she had wanted had been that one with the pink glass beads. But the woman selling the tesbihs had not allowed her to buy it, because she said, it's not a maharam, you know, this is a little bit too showy, you should get the one with the clay beads. So she actually made her buy one with the clay one, and she didn't allow her to buy one with the pink glass beads.
Wow. So yeah, it's quite an interesting...
And she said that when she saw it, she said in her mind, oh, there it is. That's how she... And I was thinking, so where was my individual will in all this? That was me thinking of my own accord, I'm going to go out and just get her something. And but it turns out that it was organised. There were higher powers organising. Oh, you wanted that tesbih? There you go. We'll send this person to bring it back to you.
It's really, really, really telling, really interesting. Like,
so that brings into mind, what was it my free will, or wasn't it?
And it just makes you. And I think this is what ultimately, you know, experiences like this, they build that trust.
Yeah.
So now that, for example,
that's a hujjah, you know. It's like, yeah.
So now that you've experienced that, you've gone through that, you must have been, you know, stunned almost that, wow, this happened. And she herself, she was like, wow, this. So now on the basis of that, you may be tested with something else because you've been given that blessing of that hujjah, as you mentioned. So because I've shown you how my hand works, now deal with this. Do you see what I mean? So it's...
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose, yes, your tawakkul has... I think that's a good point, because I think I've said in the past, or I've observed in the past, that in spite of these events happening, I'm sure the viewers have got loads of stories they could tell about these kind of events. In spite of them happening as proofs, we can still go back to square one, where, you know, why isn't this working out for me? What am I doing wrong? I shouldn't have taken that decision, or, you know, many other kind of doubtful thoughts. Doesn't Allah care for me? What does this thing about Allah caring about every detail of your life? How can that be? You know.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm just giving that as an example. You know. So I think even after all of these proofs or things happening, we're quite weak. So it's a matter of building up that tawakkul.
Like we said, it's a gradual process.
Yeah.
And I suppose, things like this ultimately are able to build that reliance. Before we look at building that. It's just a story has come to mind. And in terms of this rizq, for example, being allotted, and because often, you know, the test and the reliance in God comes in this manner. I remember a tradition, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this comes back to the time of Imam Ali, and he was with one of his companions, and they were about to enter the mosque, and the Imam, for I think maybe they were about to go to battle or what it was, he had his armor with him, or a shield, and there was an individual outside of the mosque, and he said to this individual, while I go to pray, if you can just look after this, and I will return. And so when the Imam came out with the companion, the individual had disappeared. So the individual had gone, and the Imam thought to himself that, or the companion with the Imam said to himself, this guy has stolen your shield. He must have, either he's taken it, or he's probably gone to sell it in the market, or he's... So after the prayers, the Imam and the companion, they go to the market and they find the shield in the market, and the Imam pays the individual for the shield, and so he asked the person who he bought it from, and he asked him, how much did you buy this shield from this individual? And he said, I bought it for example, shall we say 10 dinar or 10 dirham. And the Imam said, subhanallah, I was going to gift that individual 10 dirham for having looked after my shield. So it's as if the rizq has been allotted. It's now the free will as to how you will get there. So this individual chose to get his 10 in a certain way, whereas the Imam was going to give him the same 10 in a halal mean, if you like. And I think that's ultimately for us to reflect on, in that sense that, you know, what we are allotted and some of the things that we make gains with in this life, they're going to come anyway. Like you've mentioned previously, where the Imam says, don't be too happy at what you do eventually gain, because that was actually what was written for you. And don't be too sorrowful for what you lose, because it was always going to be that way. It's just ultimately
it's a good point,
the means as to how we get there. And I think, I mean, rizq and our livelihoods, these are really telling ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in terms of testing our trust in Him. Because, you know, we'll trust you in everything, but you know what, when it comes to my livelihood, I need to be there, I need to be switched on, I need to know exactly what's going on. And we forget, I know I'm speaking to myself here, we forget that, you know, everything is through Him. And not necessarily our own efforts or our own creating, or what we feel like we are creating opportunities for ourselves. I was going to say,
I think definitely, I remember years ago having a student who, again, hadn't done quite so well in her exams as she wanted. They were a little bit naughty back in those days. And she was actually quite upset, and she was worried about what's going to happen with her future, and she thought everything's ruined now. And I remember saying to her that, you know, life does not always just go in a straight line. It really doesn't. And I think, again, many people watching can easily testify to that, especially people who have migrated, as an example, or you know, come out of a war situation. There you were, living your life like everybody else. Suddenly you have to get up and leave, go somewhere else that you've never been. Just put your trust in Allah that something's going to work out, and find your way. And wherever you end up, you know, it was never somewhere where you planned. And I think that's a sign that, you know, again, as you say, Allah is the one who is organising how things unfold. But often people don't also have that tawakkul. Also, as Quran says, You know, it's only when you're drowning you go, help me Allah, I trust you. You know? And I think that's similar in life, that it's only when you actually have no other choice, you've run out of options for yourself, in a sense, you've got no other choice but just to put that reliance on Allah. And that's when you see it starting to operate in your life. And it's a secret in a way that's revealed. It's like, look, if you just sweep aside what you think options in terms of what you can do, and you really literally just put trust in me, I will provide a way out for you. But we often think, well, I'll make that plan B in case all my other little plans don't work out. If my other little plans don't work out, then as plan B, I will put all my trust in Allah. So actually we never get to the point where we discover what Allah could unfold for us, or what Allah could give us.
Or ultimately we end up learning the hard way.
Yes, yeah.
Because I feel there are always going to be opportunities where we'll learn, or we hopefully when we take those opportunities and we do learn. But you know, it's that insulating yourself, like we've mentioned earlier, when you know you've put your reliance in Him. It gives you that freedom. It gives you that, so that whatever is thrown your way, you know it's meant for you, or it's better for you. Looking at it, or flipping the discussion, ultimately, when you see somebody who, like we mentioned earlier in terms of rizq and things like this, when you see someone who displays characteristics of pride or of arrogance, that they have managed to achieve whatever they have achieved, or they look down, we've mentioned prejudice in previous shows, when they harbour these kind of characteristics, but particularly, keeping the discussion with regards to like a rizq and these kind of things, when you have individuals who display pride, arrogance almost, and chauvinistic kind of behaviour, the idea that they have managed to amass maybe wealth, or when they display this, is this ultimately a telling sign that they lack in this trust of God, in that they believe it's from themselves and it was not from Him? And ultimately, at the same time, those individuals, this is very difficult, but those individuals who lose hope and who show that loss of hope, who show that desperation, and who, this is very difficult, and we pray we're never in these situations, that they end up having to grovel and beg and put their trust in people, and show their weakness to people. It's ultimately a sign of that, loss of, or lack of faith, or lack of trust in God.
Yes, I guess, yes. Two examples of two types of people that don't have tawakkul, in a sense. That when someone is given something, they become exultant, so they start to become proud and arrogant towards other people. I mean, sometimes they can actually take it as a sign that they are favoured by Allah. So, Allah has favoured me with 3 Mercedes in the drive, and so they can think that they are kind of special, and that I think a lot of this thinking goes on in the States. Actually, there's a type of kind of Christian practice over there that sees being given wealth as a sign of being favoured by God, and that if you're poor, you're not really favoured by God. But it reminds me again of another statement by Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha, where he says that if anyone should have had pride, it should have been the prophets, because of how they were favoured by Allah. But instead, what Allah did was to bend their backs to the earth and make them humble people, make them go through trials and tribulations, and make them show compassion towards the people. And he says, so don't think that being given material blessings or material wealth is a sign of being favoured, because the prophets are the most favoured, but they are the most tested. And I think there's stories of, you know, Urafah who actually got a little bit uncomfortable when things started to go right for them. It would be, you know, what trick are you playing on me, Allah? Not trick, but what test are you playing on me, Allah? They felt more comfortable with going through trials, because then they would know that they were under Allah's attention. So yeah, it's a mistake, we could say, to think that having wealth or having a job or having a large family is a sign of being favoured, for one thing, and also forgetting that it could quite easily be taken away, and also that you may be being tested as to whether you do become proud or not. And I think, yeah, for people who have lost everything, it is a great trial. I don't belittle the severe trials that people go through, where, you know, they almost come to that point where they feel Allah has let them down or neglected them. I think it's a human thing. But again, we are here to come to know Him. That's also our purpose in this life. And like I was saying earlier, perhaps that person would not have come to know Allah if their life had continued on in a good way.
Yeah.
Or in a good way, in inverted commas.
I think yeah, there is a tradition, correct me if I'm wrong, that says that if you do not experience some kind of test or some kind of calamity every sort of 40 days or something along those lines, that then know that something is wrong. So that in itself is a sign that, you know, you need to maybe reflect and see that, you know, something is, if everything is going too well, or but one of the, I think when we look at this topic of trials, tests, tribulations, and reliance in God in that sense, is that everyone's test is different.
Yeah.
So there's no generalizations in this context, and ultimately, you know, we see in the Quran as well is that people are tested to what they are able to manage. You know, you're not going to be tested more than what you can handle.
Yeah.
And you know, when you look at individuals who have, like you mentioned before, people who have lost everything, or, you know, people who live in dire circumstances. We're talking, you know, we're talking about maybe 1/5 of the world, right, who don't know, even more in fact. You know, we're talking about $1 a day, or people that don't know where the next meal is coming from. You know, these are realities that we have absolutely no experience or understanding about, you know, like being hungry and not knowing what's going to happen next, and you've got 3 kids, for example. Now, such a trial, such a test, you know, maybe he knew I wouldn't manage that, I wouldn't be able to handle that, so he's not tried me in that sense, and he's tried another individual in that sense. And maybe had that individual been put in a situation where they had, you know, silver spoons and millions, they would have gone astray in that sense. And this test is what is ideal for them to recognize and experience God, like you've mentioned. So everyone's test is different, but ultimately, you know, it's on the basis of God will only test you or try you to the point that you can manage, and you can then recognize, you know, His power or His role in all of this, and then build that ultimate trust in Him. And we're coming to the end of the show, and I wanted to look briefly at this station. Like the initial hadith mentioned, the idea that you become pleased with whatever He allots for you in that sense. It's a station called Ridha. So a station that's higher than trust in God is Ridha, where you are pleased with whatever happens for you. If you can elaborate on that, maybe this could be, for example, an aim. that we may have, that we should be pleased with whatever He whatever He gives for us, and maybe we can reach a stage of tawakkul where we can have trust. So if we aim to be pleased,
right,
and we can, because usually they say aim for the stars and reach the moon. Something along those lines. Just the idea that we should aim to be at a station where whatever happens, like, we're pleased. It's very difficult. In fact, we were mentioning before the show, a friend of mine who has passed away, Dhulfiqar Hashim, if the viewers can remember him, maybe recite a Surah Fatiha for him. He had trials and tribulations that only he could handle. Other individuals, maybe myself, I couldn't have handled that, and that's why he was provided that test. But the point here is the idea of being pleased. So he was terminally ill for maybe 6 or 7 years, quite young. But the idea of being pleased at that, really difficult. Being pleased that I'm going through this kind of a situation.
I think that being pleased, like Imam Hussein alayhi salam, very famously on the day of Ashura, said, "I am pleased with your decree, O Lord." And as, again, I think it was Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had honoured Imam Hussein alayhi salam with this sacrifice. But Imam Hussein was able to be pleased with this decree because he understood that it was an honour for him. And obviously, he's still being remembered today, and he is the flag of truth, and that is a station that no one else can have. With regard to whoever came after the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his holy progeny. So it was a unique situation, a unique trial and a unique blessing. And I guess that's with all of our trials, that they are unique. So I think for that pleasure to come with what has been decreed, it means that one has to have come to an understanding of what it is that Allah wants to do for us, in a way, or the situation that He wants to put us in, or the station that He wants to give us. So again, from a kind of shallow materialistic perspective, we may feel that certain trials have lowered us in the sight of humanity or in the sight of our neighbours, when actually the patience that we may have in that trial may have raised us in the sight of Allah. So it's kind of looking beyond that. And a lot of people who again, I've spoken to over the years, who have been through trials, and you think, oh my God, that was so difficult for you. And they say, yes, but if it hadn't happened, then I wouldn't have realised X, Y, Z, or I wouldn't have seen life from this perspective, or I wouldn't have understood. And I can give an example, which I hope isn't inappropriate, from Muhammad Ali, the boxer, where he said, it was something interesting I read a few days ago. He said that there was a point in my life where I had conquered the world and I wasn't satisfied. And so Allah gave me this illness in order to show that He is in control and I'm just His servant. So he was liberated from his own ego. He had had that material success, but he hadn't found peace in that. Whereas within his extended illness that we know he's had, Parkinson's disease, he has found contentment in that, because his connection with Allah has been corrected. His relationship with Allah has been corrected through that, and brought back contentment.
Yeah, again, fitting. And I think all these examples, from our own lives, what we experience, where we can find that trust and that peace, or that rida even, and ultimately as well in others. So like we've seen in the Quran, and I think it was a beautiful tradition from the 7th Imam, where I think it was Ma'mun, he says to him, and he said it to him, he asked him in a patronizing way, give me a tradition, give me some advice. And the Imam replied to him that in everything you see there is a sign. So yeah, likewise, when you see individuals and the tests and trials and whatever they go through, there is always an example or a lesson or something to take from there. And like, for example, you've mentioned Muhammad Ali or this individual who's just passed away. There are all signs to find and to see and to draw near or to draw an understanding and build ultimately that test. I want to thank you very much once again for taking the time out. It was a pleasure. Thank you for watching at home. And we pray, inshallah, that we can increase in our tawakkul and, inshallah, our rida. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ahlul Bayt TV, the holy household for every household.